Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So we are in the middle of this series calling the Selves.
No, we're not in the middle. I think this might be the last one.
Well, we're wrapping up the series.
We're wrapping up the series.
And in some ways, I think that we are slicing concepts and ideas down to the width of one electron.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. Like, we're really getting into some specific clean slicing. I think it's valuable. I think we're basically understanding self-trust, self-awareness, self-esteem. This episode, we're going to talk about basically self-confidence, knowing what we're doing in the world. I didn't have confidence. I was going to say the right thing.
What are we talking about? ...
the ellipse. So as we're clean slicing all of these, I want to just refer back to that entire series. So if you're finding this video or this podcast kind of on its own, and this is your first landing point, we're wrapping the series up. So what we talk about builds on itself over the course of many weeks and different episodes. I encourage you, if you're just listening to this one, to go back and fill in the gaps of all the things we're talking about. Because on the last episode, we talked about personality types and self-trust. And I think that self-confidence and self-trust are very related to each other. So we're going to talk about self-confidence on this episode, self-trust on the last episode. And again, like I said, we're slicing these as thin as one electron because I think there's really nuanced distinctions here.
Yeah.
It might even feel like it's too many distinctions.
Too much.
Too clean sliced. But I think there's value in it.
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I think a lot of people would say self-trust and self-confidence are very similar things. And the series we started with self-awareness, which is effectively why we're doing all of this. Self-awareness requires us to be willing to reevaluate what we think we know about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so all of this, like you mentioned, clean slicing, very, very, very clean slicing. We even talked about the difference between self-worth and self-value. And we had a whole podcast on self-esteem, and we had one on self-certainty. And you mentioned the last podcast was on self-trust, and now we're wrapping up with self-confidence. These are all access points to inquiring within, going inside of ourselves and trying to figure out what we think. And the reason why we chose this group of selves is they tend to be the sticking point. They tend to be the reason why we don't want to do too deep a dive, because we get to that point where like, oh, I don't have high self-worth. I don't really want to look any further because that is a very disconcerting feeling. So why would I want to do any more dumpster diving?
Yeah.
Well, how are you defining self-worth? Maybe it's not that bad a Babadook, right? Maybe it's not that big scary thing. Maybe it's just you need to get a better relationship with it and understand how you experience this, and maybe it's okay, and maybe you can go further.
Yeah. Same
thing with value. And we talked about certainty, self-certainty, and what we're uncertain about, so that when we experience that feeling of uncertainty, we don't immediately put it down to something's terribly, terribly wrong. No, we all feel a sense of uncertainty about different things, and you just kind of have to hang there.
Yeah. And so from a principled place, how I look at this for somebody watching or listening, the best way to utilize what we've been talking about in this series and even in this episode is to apply it to the self. You know, a lot of people talk about personality types, especially in the Myers-Briggs system, in topical or type-based levels. So they go, the 16 types, how they'll do underwater basket weaving, and they walk through how each type will do some activity or think about something. And we talk about that often, but one of the things we'd like to focus on is the principles. And we spent, almost a decade now going through the cognitive functions and how you are wired as your personality type. And we're going to continue to address those issues, talking about each specific type, how they're wired. These selves are almost adjacent to that, though. And I almost imagine, if I'm listening along or watching, I'm almost imagining there's like a metaphor of almost an owner's manual I'm creating for my life, that I'm capturing not only how my personality type is wired, but these adjacent topics that really give me a glimpse into myself. So now I've got an understanding of, okay, I understand where my self-trust lies. I understand where my self-confidence lies. I understand where all these things happen. And I think we want to encourage you to reflect on your own personality, your own self. How do you show up with these elements? Yeah. How does this influence your experience in life? Because you have a really good starting point. Now we have a basis for you to take action and go create the life you want.
Yeah, I think there's value in understanding a concept through the lens of the 16 types. We tend to usually go through cognitive functions. which are the mental processes that support the concept of these types. But I think when it comes to something like this, we're definitely using type as an access point. And I think I've mentioned this in a couple of the podcasts in the series, that this is more like an on-ramp into self-inquiry. It's not meant to be a fleshing out of type theory more.
Yeah.
Nothing we've said is type canon. I mentioned a certainty model that I think works really well with understanding our relationship to our functions, but I'm the only one who said who is saying that. It's not like type canon anywhere. And this has been my experience, that if I understand my relationship to each of these functions in this concept of certainty and uncertainty, it explains a lot, and I can understand myself a little bit more and maybe get an answer for why I behave so bafflingly in certain contexts of my life.
Yeah.
So when we dive into this final one, I think what we're trying to do is make a note that this is really less about you understanding type theory more and more about understanding yourself. And Joel, you even mentioned the last podcast about self-trust. Like, I forgot to tell people to go consult the car model. So if you're new to type, this is your dialogue.
Oh yeah. So if you're like, what the heck are you guys talking about? The cognitive functions, maybe you're either new to type or you have a relationship to the 4-letter code that you come with, like I have ENFP preferences. Well, that ENFP points to the cognitive functions I use to learn information and make decisions. And so if you just go over to personalityhacker.com/car model, that's a great reference to get started in understanding how that 4-letter code shows you your cognitive functions. That's what they're technically called. And they're unique to you. And it informs how you do everything, really.
Yeah. And I think the reason why we didn't mention it in the last podcast is because self-trust is it's such a human experience. We weaved functions and type a little bit into it, but we really talked about it more on a principle level. This week, we're going to talk about self-confidence. And I do actually want to go back to the model and talk about self-confidence. Maybe this is interestingly through the lens of the perceiving functions, the sensing and intuitive functions. Through most of this, we have hit the judging or decision-making functions more. And the reason why is that tends to be, our decision-making functions are where we evaluate things. So a lot of this conversation has been about how we're self-evaluating. Where do we see ourselves? Do we think that we have worth? How do we esteem ourselves or estimate our value? How's our self-trust? How are we with determining whether or not we're going to place a certain amount of trust in ourselves? And oftentimes these tend to be filtered through our decision-making functions because that's what decides what's important and what's valuable. Self-confidence is a little different. Even though it's related to self-trust, I think to build self-confidence, it's almost like we need to be more perceptive than anything. And we've been reading the textbook definitions of all of these things. In part, that's the clean slice and dice, even though you're like, nobody cares about the definitions, Antonia.
Oh, everybody loves a good evening of dictionary reading around the campfire.
That's right.
Are you kidding? It's
Yeah.
like one of the most popular things that anyone ever does.
Yeah, I know that I'm a total nerd because I love reading the etymology of words, and I know that I'm unusual in that.
I love the etymology of words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, does everybody have an etymology dictionary in their bathroom next to their toilet?
I like the etymology of words better than I like the definition of words.
Yeah, me too, actually. Interesting. So that said, I think part of this clean slicing and trying to understand ourselves through these different lenses, I think it really benefits from a good definition. And for self-confidence, it's a feeling. So the textbook dictionary definition, hang tight. I know this is boring, but it's just one sentence. A feeling of self-assurance from one's appreciation of one's own abilities or qualities. So you have to do an assessment of oneself and appreciate what you see. And my observation has been the best way to get there is to watch yourself overcoming obstacles and then take an accounting of it. Meaning that you can't just watch yourself overcome obstacles and then shrug and go, that was no big deal. You won't gain confidence in your abilities if you undermine the value of what you've gone through. To go, oh, that was whatever that was. But it also requires you to take an accounting enough to create appreciation. So you have to be watching it. Everybody, 100% of humans that I know of have overcome obstacles because life is a series of obstacles to be overcome. Even if you had a great upbringing, even if you had, it almost seems like the universe rolled out a red carpet for you. Nobody gets through without a strong series of obstacles. So when people lack self-confidence, I always wonder, well, every time you watched yourself go through something tough and got to the other side, what did you do? Did you congratulate yourself for it? Did you take an accounting? Did you assess that happened and that appreciation for the fact that you navigated your way through that is the appropriate response? Or did you do a big shrug? So I think the perceiving functions are noteworthy here because that's where we observe things. That's where we watch things happen. And it's also where we pick and choose what we're going to observe. So each of the perceiving functions, both in the intuitive functions and the sensing functions, will come with a strength in this formula, but it will also come with a weakness in this formula. So I'd like to maybe do a little bit of a dive into that. What is going to be the strength of the intuitive functions and what's going to be the strength of the sensing functions? And then what is going to be an area that they could gain more self-confidence by adding it to that algorithm?
Let me just make sure I'm capturing what you're saying and just reiterate it from my understanding. We're going to go into the functions in a moment here, but basically you're saying it's not only taking action. So somebody that doesn't do a lot of actions in their life, going out and getting reference experience, they stay in a safe environment or contained environment, they're not setting themselves up to overcome obstacles in their life. Even though they've done that at some point, it's a continual process through our lives to set ourselves up to overcome obstacles and see ourselves do that. And what I also hear you saying is that's not enough. We also have to take an audit and an accounting for that. We need to capture that knowledge and say, yes, I did that. That's something that I can feel confident about in my experience. And if we only have the reference experience, but we don't reflect on it and take an accounting of it, we're only getting half of the benefit. So it's both taking the reference experience, and maybe you're listening right now or watching right now, and all of a sudden you're going, okay, I need to go take more action. I need to go get more reference experiences. I need to get out more and set myself up with challenge and overcome those obstacles and those challenges. Or maybe you're like, man, I'm doing this all the time, but I still struggle with self-confidence. Then your job is to now audit and capture that for review and feel good about it. Check in with yourself and like congratulate yourself and say, look at what I've done. Look at what I've overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So based on what you just mentioned, which is exactly how it works, the two extroverted perceiving functions. So this would be extroverted sensing or sensation and extroverted intuition or exploration. Their strength is that they tend to go do hard things.
This is the perceiving function used by all perceivers in the Myers-Briggs system. So
Right.
if you have a P at the end of your 4-letter code, you're going to use one of these two.
That's right. And so, and it usually is not based on wanting to challenge oneself. It's usually based on curiosity and precociousness. They will find themselves in all sorts of situations just because they were curious about what would happen if they did. And so the lack is not usually overcoming obstacles because obstacles are usually in the way of something fun or interesting. So anybody who uses that as a strength is going to have a bias towards action. Even if it's their second function or co-pilot function, they're still going to have that precociousness that encourages them to go do things that maybe other people would say are inadvisable, or that's something that not everybody does, according to other observers of those of these types actions.
Certainly.
And so that curiosity drives them to overcome obstacles. Their failing is in taking a good accounting. And on the flip side, people who use introverted intuition or perspectives or introverted sensing or memory as a strength and perception.
These are, by the way, all judgers in the Myers-Briggs system. So if you have a J at the end of your 4-letter code, you'll use one of these two.
Mm-hmm. They are usually better at taking a good accounting, observing themselves go through something, understanding its implications. Their challenge is oftentimes in taking the action itself or going and doing something that clearly has an obstacle that they have to get around. They usually like a little bit more controlled circumstances. Now, if these functions are in what we call the middle, right, the middle of the cognitive function stack or the middle of the car, if they're your co-pilot and 10-year-old, if that's where they live, these descriptions won't seem as extreme to you. You'll say a little bit of me is good at taking action and a little bit of me is good at taking and accounting. And so in some ways, you have a bit easier time of doing the full formula. But if they are on the left side of the car model, or if they're your first and fourth function, we call them the driver and the 3-year-old, or they're also known as the dominant and the inferior, you might have a little bit of you have more of a stratification between these two parts. So these would be, anybody who has them in the first and fourth position would be EP types and IJ types. Anybody who has them in the middle and are a little bit more balanced here are the IP types and the EJ types. But we'll delineate which types we're referring to as we go through each of these functions. All right, so staying with the concept that it is self-confidence is built by watching yourself overcome obstacles and then taking a proper accounting of it. The easiest place to start with are people who use extroverted intuition or exploration, and then also have introverted sensing or memory as an influence in their life, because these two functions create a polarity of each other. They are two sides of the same coin. So ENP and INP types will favor more heavily on extroverted intuition or exploration, and the ISJ and ESJ types will favor more heavily on introverted sensing or memory. The strength that, let's start actually with SJs. The strength that introverted sensing has or memory has in this formula is that they're usually watching themselves do things and they're taking an accounting of it. They're observing themselves overcome obstacles because they're really tapped into their experiences. So they'll capture an experience and they'll review it, and they'll capture an experience and they'll review it. So their strength in all of this is watching themselves overcome obstacles and taking an accounting of it. When they watch themselves overcome an obstacle, that is, they're very good at remembering it and, like you said, doing a self-audit around it. The challenge that they have is they lack confidence oftentimes in their ability to pattern fast enough when a situation is close to something that they experienced, but not exactly the same. So if they have a new obstacle in front of them and it's kind of similar to something they experienced before, but it's not exactly what they remember, they sometimes throttle themselves from engaging in that situation and therefore remove their ability to watch themselves overcome even more obstacles. So their challenge is in the throttling.
Yeah, I have an example of this. 2 days ago, I was at the eye doctor, and the woman who was doing the prep, I don't know what her official title was, but she was basically doing the prep. I started talking about glaucoma. She was talking about glaucoma. And I just said, she was talking about it, and I mentioned marijuana. I was like, that's what marijuana is used for, right? To mitigate glaucoma. And I think it was, my guess is she was probably an ISFJ. We do this for a living. I can't be certain, but that was my suspicion. And it totally threw her out of frame. She had never heard this information before about glaucoma and cannabis. And she was trying to kind of understand it. And then she just went into repeating a lot of information that she had. And she's like, okay, we're done here. And I leave the room. About 5 minutes later, she calls me back in. She's like, I'm so sorry that I didn't track anything I was doing. I couldn't even focus. I was forcing her to pattern something right in the moment. And it completely disengaged her from all the knowledge base that she had in that moment.
It threw her out of frame.
Yeah, it threw her out of frame. And then she felt, I don't think she had confidence in that. She kind of wanted to get me out of the room as quickly as possible. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to leave yet. I was like, oh, I guess we're done here, because I was making her feel very uncertain by introducing this new concept. I was trying to take something she was saying and pattern it in real time in front of her. And it just was not in her wheelhouse to do this. So she calls me back in. We have to finish 3 more things before the eye doctor can see me. The point is that I think this is what was happening for her, is I put her in a deeply uncertain place because I threw a pattern in that she wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
And now she didn't have as much confidence in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. So ISJ types are very good at mining all the gold out of their situations, but they can sometimes lack self-confidence because they don't have that same sort of zest that puts them in a lot of new situations. So for ISJ types, the leverage point is being willing to throw yourself into more new situations, overcome a larger variety of obstacles. When an ISJ type does that, they then are able to get better approximations. They're like, well, I had a situation like this, and I had a situation like this, and then I had one like this, and then like this. And I've had a lot of variety of situations that are almost exactly to this one, and going back to our self-trust. And I lived through all of it. So I'm going to trust my ability to navigate through this one too. Even if I make a mistake, it's going to be fine.
You call that living?
Yeah. Well, it's stretching the comfort zone, right? Yeah.
This is my weakness, so I'm making a joke. Clearly.
Yeah, of course. I didn't actually get the joke.
Living by having to take every single instance and not pattern your life.
Oh.
And then in aggregate mapping it together.
Right.
To kind of get a sense of your timeline and your experiences and all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's actually a very rich, rewarding life that people like us have a tendency to not do.
Hence the joke.
Thank you for explaining it to me. I think I was just so in my explanation. I'm like, what's happening? So I'm going to now leave and realize we have to finish the podcast. You completely throw me out of frame like the woman at the eye doctor. So the flip side of this, and by the way, ESJ types will also have a bit of this.
Yeah.
Now, they're going to have closer access to the other side of extroverted intuition or exploration. They'll have a little closer access. So they'll have a tendency to do more things. They'll actually throw themselves into a wider variety of experiences than an ISJ will, just naturally, just through curiosity and that, as I mentioned, that precociousness. But they're still going to be real hesitant. There's still going to be a sense of I don't know if I really feel good about this situation. I don't quite have a strong template for it yet. So even with ESJ types, the recommendation is do it anyway. Right? Even if you don't really remember the last time you saw this, or you've never experienced this before, or you don't have you don't really feel confident in your pattern, do it anyway and overcome the obstacle. And the larger amount of situations you accumulate, the more confidence you're going to have in yourself to be able to handle anything that comes. So the other side of this is people who lead with extroverted intuition or exploration. These will be ENP types. And as mentioned before, they have a tendency to believe, like you said, that's not living. Why? Because for us, one's a pattern. When we enter a situation, we're like, I think I got kind of a lay of the land. I think I have an approximation of what's going on here, so off to the races I go.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of, I'll just be able to figure it out in real time. I'll lay the train tracks as the train is in motion. And that confidence in one's ability to just navigate through the situation and figure it out as you go gives them a lot of affectation of confidence. They seem to have a lot of self-confidence because they seem to trust their ability to navigate through novel and unfamiliar terrain. The challenge is that when they hit a lack of confidence, or when they hit something that they're hesitant about, they don't remember all the other times that they experienced it. They really struggle, and by they I mean us, me, really struggle with remembering, where have I seen this before? When did I do this? And sometimes self-confidence can just in general be eroded, not even for specific situations, but just an overall sense of self-confidence can be eroded through just simply not remembering everything you've been through. Every once in a while, an ENP will go, I guess I've been through a lot, haven't I? You just don't stop long enough to take that accounting and register its meaning and what that meant for you as a person, what that says about you as a person. It's hard to check in and mine that data out. And so for ENP types, and by the way, INPs are going to be a little less precocious. They're going to have more of that curiosity, but a little less. And they're going to identify a little more with the idea of taking in accounting because they're more balanced in this way. I was just going to say, but the leverage point for ENP types, after I diverted to say INPs are going to have a little less of this, the leverage point for ENP types is to sit down and take an accounting.
Yeah.
Write out your timeline. Maybe journal about it. What are all the hard things I've been through? What are all the moments when something huge got in my way and I just navigated around it? And then sit with that and really, as mentioned, determine what that means for you as an individual. What does that say about you? after you create this timeline.
I realize I'm breaking data rapport with you like crazy.
Okay.
Right. We teach in our profile training course not just about energetic rapport or vibe rapport. It's also informational.
Right.
And for some reason, I must be in a very break rapport with you mood tonight, like informationally. Don't know why. Long story short, I also have noticed that ENPs and INPs, there is an accounting. It's just not a reliable accounting as well. Like in my own life, like I remember key things. I just don't remember all the things. And sometimes I take the wrong lessons from those, right? And so I think it's a full audit is also what we're looking at, because something that we did, quote unquote, have an accounting for, a strong memory for, that can just mess us up as much as not having an awareness at all. I can overvalue something I've got an accounting for, right? Mm-hmm. Like I've got this moment and I'm like, oh, that's the thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, but look at all the other stuff that conflicts with that.
Right. Because one's a pattern.
Yeah.
Completely ignoring all the other times we had an opposite experience. That one time, somehow that one left an imprint, right? We've got a scar from it, or it was a big deal. And so that one time now sets the stage for anything in that arena. Absolutely. That is such a great point. So it's a full accounting. It's not overvaluing any one moment, but it's also not undervaluing all the moments. It's taking that timeline and going, okay, so what are the lessons I've learned from the past? And so the combination of taking action and then doing that audit, that accounting, helps somebody on the other side, that's the formula, equals a greater sense of self-confidence.
So let's move to the other two functions of extroverted sensing sensation, introverted intuition, or perspectives. I won't break data rapport. Let's jump right into it.
Okay. All right. So it's a very, very similar dynamic. And again, these two functions are polarity opposites of each other. They're two sides of the same coin. So one comes with the other. One side will be a strength and the other side will be a place of uncertainty. It'll be, sometimes we're blind to it. Sometimes it's just simply a weakness. And sometimes it's not that much of a weakness, but we still have uncertainty in it. So we don't rely on its information. Regardless of what our relationship is with the other side, it's going to have a very similar dynamic as extroverted intuition, exploration, and introverted sensing memory. One side's going to be better at the overcoming obstacles, and the other side is going to be better at taking and accounting. So for extroverted sensing or sensation, this is the strength for SP types, primarily ESP types who have it as a driver or dominant function, but also ISP types that have it as a co-pilot or auxiliary. And unsurprisingly, this side is about overcoming obstacles. It's about getting into action. And the function's strength, it's a little different than exploration. Exploration trusts its ability to pattern what's going on. I might never have been in this situation ever, but I've been in other situations that kind of look like it may be, sort of, a little bit. I'll just figure it out. Extroverted sensing or sensation is better about understanding timing and opportunities and the value of courage, just going and trying it. It's focused on experience. And so it doesn't matter if I'm able to pattern it. Did I have an experience? Was I able to be in that experience? And did I survive? That's a win, right? Awesome. And so this is a function that gets really in touch with the flow of how the moment works, timing, and opportunities that come along to have even better, more rewarding and enriching experiences. Obstacles are not that difficult for ESPs to get through. In fact, almost everything interesting and fun is on the other side of an obstacle. And so obstacles are, they're their bread and butter, really, is to get around obstacles to get to something interesting, something that sates their curiosity, or rather sates their desire to have an experience. And that could be painful or it could be pleasurable, but it was an experience.
In order to do that, though, you can't second guess yourself. Mm-mm. You can't say, am I seeing this in the right perspective? To take that kind of a quick action, you kind of have to believe what you see. You have to believe the opportunity in front of you. You have to go, opportunity, action. And therein lies some of the uncertainty from the other side of the polarity.
Right. So, and ISPs are going to have a bit of this. It's not going to be as strong as the ESP types, but they're going to have that desire to just jump into action and make it happen. And they're usually pretty good at it unless their hand has been slapped away a lot. And then it's a whole different ball of wax. That's a whole different problem. But anybody who has extroverted sensing or sensation in the first two positions they're going to have this impulse to go have experiences and go overcome obstacles to get to those experiences.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
On the other side is introverted intuition or perspectives. So this is the part of them that takes away the right meaning from the experience. You could also call it implication. And just like with introverted sensing, it's taking the right lesson. So NPs sometimes don't take the right lesson because they got really burned in this one situation and it over imprinted on them, never do anything or feel confident in that way at all, right? For ESPs, introverted intuition is the way to understand the patterns of meaning throughout their life and to understand long-range implications, to be able to see a long-range simulation. If I do this, it will most likely lead down this particular road. Now, they're going to have a little bit of this in them, just like NP types have a little bit of introverted sensing. And we have to trust that even though this is an uncertain part of us, it will still be available to us when we need to call on it. So it's not like SP types never understand implication, but that's the thing that's harder for them. And so they might, just like the NP types, start doubting themselves, stop having confidence in their ability because maybe they've made the same mistake over and over. They might end up maybe getting burned in relationships repeatedly and not being able to see the through line of the pattern. And now they just say, I can't have relationships, right? And they lack confidence in their ability to do that. And so the leverage point for SP types is just like for NP types is like to sit down and create a timeline. It's to sit down and meditate on what's the through line. What is the narrative running through all of this? What are the implications that I just wasn't seeing? But in retrospect, I can look back and go, this is actually what was going on. This is my perspective at the time. This is the context that it was in. And this is why I keep making this mistake over and over. I can find the pattern in it of the mistakes I keep making. And I can be on the lookout for that. When I jump into a situation, I can be on the lookout for, I attract this kind of person. Maybe I should be watching the markers of that kind of person and not jump into things so quickly. So that's the leverage point for SP types. On the other side is introverted intuition or perspectives. This is the perceiving function for NJs. It'll be particularly strong in INJ types, and it will also be a strength for ENJs. So introverted intuition or perspectives, that's what it does. It understands the pattern, right? It understands the meaning and the narrative and the implication, and it sees way down the line. So taking and accounting is the thing that it's strong at. It understands, like if it has gone through something, it's usually pretty good at understanding its meaning for the self. And the thing it's really good at is reframing. When it's gone through a situation, it will oftentimes take a good lesson from it because it will see it from all the different frames. It'll understand it from a lot of different perspectives. And so if the situation itself was not particularly fruitful, it wasn't like this major, I overcame this major obstacle and it was, it was this, a hero's journey. Even if it was just a small one, introverted intuition or perspectives can usually mine the gold out of it and go, well, if I look at it from this angle, I actually really took an important life lesson from that. So taking and accounting is what it's strong at. So unsurprisingly, the other side is what it's weak at, which is extroverted sensing or sensation. And that is feeling ready to take action, knowing when the timing is right, and spotting and jumping into opportunities. So it tends to throttle itself. It'll mine all the gold out of the situation, but it will throttle itself from having the situation in the first place. And so its lack of confidence is oftentimes something that shows up in just not feeling ready to jump into the situation. INJs are particularly going to resonate with that. ENJs will also to some extent, not as much as the INJs, but ENJs will also watch themselves throttle when they feel unsafe in a situation, when they don't feel like they can match the physical demands of the context that they're in.
Well, I think ENJs are going to probably struggle not necessarily with taking action, but taking actions outside of things they've constructed kind of a control for. Like, they're going to want to pare things down to actions they know will work or create the relationships they want. I think that's really what an EJ is going to do. So they're going to get into action, but they're going to have a tendency to fall back on templates more likely, like things they know work in the outside world is, I think, how it's probably going to show up. So then could we then say, I think what we're saying is if you're a judger in the Myers-Briggs system, you probably need to take more action or take more actions that you don't normally take. One of those two things. If you're a perceiver in the Myers-Briggs system, you probably need to take an accounting of what happened and the meaning of what happened more. So both are important, but if you can already probably see in your own life, you lean one way or the other, and it probably has to do with whether you're a judge or perceiver, which one you need to round out more in your life to build that self-confidence.
Yeah, not just taking actions, but specifically ones that have obstacles.
Of course. Challenge, yes.
Yeah, challenge. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, and that's what I think, like with the EJs I was talking about, like I could just see an ENTJ, for example, saying, I'm not going to pick something that I can't win at. Right. I'm going to always take an action that I know I'm going to put in the category of winning. And so my action set is more limited because to take an action with a challenge or obstacle means it's a little more uncertain. So I think there's still action focused. It's just what kind of actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so it is hard to do. To build self-confidence, the reason why people oftentimes lack it is it requires something of us on one side that we're good at, and then the other side that we have a weakness at.
Yeah.
And so nobody just gets to have self-confidence. Now, some types have more of an affectation of it. Extrovert types have a tendency to appear more self-confident in the outside world.
We call that swagger.
Yeah.
Right? You got some swagger.
That's right.
You're walking through the world with.
Yeah. Now, not all extroverts. I mean, there's no rules here. There's just trends. So this is not a rule, but extroverts have a tendency to have the affectation of confidence, and they do tend to have confidence in the outside world a little bit more. And introverts will observe that and believe that goes all the way through to the core. The thing about introverts, though, is that they tend to know what they're good at. They tend to be better at determining the things that they feel confident around. Whereas extroverts, and I know that we're talking about it in terms of perceivers and judgers, but there's a trend that extroverts don't always take that full accounting. And so they can really even though they show up and go, well, I'll just figure it out. Anytime they're in a situation where they're once bitten, twice shy, or something doesn't work out and they start to feel like, oh, just moving and being in action is not saving me here. Their challenge is doing the inner work they need to do oftentimes. So obviously EPs, the ones that lead with extroverted sensing or sensation or extroverted intuition or exploration, they're going to be the most likely to just get into a situation that has an obstacle and just tell themselves they can figure it out. And they're going to be the most undermined by their lack of taking an accounting. And IJ types that lead with introverted sensing memory or introverted intuition perspectives are going to have the reverse problem. And then the other types are going to fall somewhere in between, depending upon the work they've done with their co-pilot function, their relationship with their 10-year-old or tertiary. That's going to very much influence all of this. But I do want to make one more note about all of this before we conclude the podcast. Because, I mean, unless you had a lot more angles to hit.
Oh, I've got like 6 more hours to go, technically.
In the last podcast, you kept like opening loops.
I know.
We're like, are we over an hour? We should probably close up shop.
This is going to be way worse.
Yeah. Well, that one was
I'm going to keep going on this one.
A little bit more principle based and human, just general humanness. This one we've sort of put it through the lens of type a little bit more. So it'd be a little more tidy. That said, there's no verb for confidence, but there is a verb for a word that is at the the base word for confidence, which is confide. So self-confidence is another version of self-confiding. And to confide means to share a secret with somebody or something that's personal through mutual trust or having a baseline of mutual trust. So self-confidence in some ways is being willing to take these assessments, to look at these secret things, these things that we don't always advertise to other people, the parts of ourselves that we don't feel as good about or secure about, but we know are there if we just choose to look at them. And to confide in ourselves in the sense of looking at these secret parts, these parts that we might not feel as good about, with quote unquote mutual trust or self-trust. The parts of ourselves go into all of this. And just like we talked about last week with self-trust, part of self-trust is knowing that no matter how something turns out, you're not going to beat yourself up for it. You're going to have a sense of generosity and care and concern about yourself. That's how you build self-trust, is by allowing yourself to make mistakes and not make it the end of the world. Self-confidence or self-confiding is very similar. It's perceiving yourself through life. And then when you take this accounting and when you do this audit and take the lessons out of life, you don't immediately go to beating yourself up. You go to a place where you can hang with these secrets, the secrets of what you're insecure about, the secrets about what you don't really feel like you've got dialed in. And you trust that that's not going to be the end of the world, that you can be humble enough to take this honest audit, that you can have a sense of modesty. And that modesty where you are accurately observing these things, like you're not puffing things up that shouldn't be puffed up. You're not synthetically building yourself up in a way that you know you didn't earn. I think a piece of this is it's not claiming things you haven't earned, which is something we talked about with self-esteem, I believe, and self-value, I think. One of the selves. We talked about the idea of not claiming territory you did not win. So when you go in to talk about these secret things with yourself, you don't make false claims. You sit with it, you hang with it, and you know that you can trust yourself to do a modest audit. And when you do that, your self-confidence increases because you know you're being honest. You know that you are trusting what you're observing and seeing. You're not going to trick yourself. You're not going to turn your head away. You're not going to pretend something that isn't true. And that's both for the positive and the negative. You're not owning things you didn't earn, but you're not also denying things you did earn. You're giving yourself the full credit. You're giving yourself all the things that you have a right to lay claim to. And that's part of that trust in the self, that mutual trust with all the parts of who you are, that you're not trying to subvert the reality of it through those perceptive filters.
So that brought something up, not to go on for 6 hours literally, but it did bring something up just to add to that. I agree with everything you just said. This idea of self-confidence, like confiding in someone, means that it's just between me and you, and we're not going to blast it in an external way. So I wrote a little note here, self-validation, meaning that I don't necessarily have to brag about, or on a lower level, exclaim the things that I've done, the obstacles I've overcome, to feel a sense of self-confidence. I can have that conversation in confidence with myself. I can confide in myself that, hey, Joel, we know we've got this, like a message back. And I think it really brought awareness to me, because I think I have in the past needed other people to validate my obstacle overcoming, right? I've needed other people to reflect to me, oh, good job. That was great. Yeah, you did really good there. Look at that challenge you overcame. And I think part of self-confidence is bringing that back home, bringing that back into the self, to say, I confide in myself. I don't have to say this to anybody else. Me, myself, and I know this about myself. And I think that's really important, is being okay with being the only person that knows that about me is me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really key element that came up for me. And it goes to self-validation and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. There is space and need to get feedback from the outside world And so it's not that one has to be exclusively self-validating. We're social creatures. Jonathan Haidt says we're 90% ape and 10% bee.
Yeah.
And so there is a part of this that is intrinsically linked with everybody else and does need positive feedback to some extent. But we're not talking about that in this series. We're talking about our relationship to ourselves. And so I think what you just mentioned is incredibly important. The ability to self-validate, the ability to not require input from other people to rest into one's own confidence. It is one of the gifts of self-confidence. It really is. It's a byproduct of being able to build this up, is you let go of the need for everybody else to give you kudos. And you also, on the flip side of that, self-validating is like, look at how great I've been doing things. You also mitigate self-flagellation or public flagellation, which is, look at how terrible I am and what a martyr. I mean, I don't think anybody says what a martyr I am, but that's basically what they're doing, is they're very loudly talking about all their faults. We talked about in a previous episode on the Selves, it's like a false front of humility. And that's also in some ways trying to gain other people's attention and approval or validation in some ways. And it's a sign of a lack of self-confidence, because that's what you should be confiding in yourself as well.
Yeah.
And trusted confidants. You talk about your problems with the people in your life who care about you and support you, and you have that reciprocal relationship with them. They tell you their problems and you support them, and they confide in you. But you don't blast it out to everybody else. You don't brag about everything, and you also don't, what is it, the gnashing of teeth and the wailing. You also don't do that with everybody. And I think that a person who has built self-confidence, you won't see them doing either of those things.
And that routes back to the cultural norm at the time of this recording, which is to articulate and lament all of my struggles, inner and outer struggles, to the world. Like I think the cultural expectation is that we're going to tweet about it. We're going to put on the social media. We're going to record videos about all of our struggles. And it kind of, in a way, betrays self-confidence. And no wonder so many people struggle with it, because we're blasting it out to everybody and saying, look, I've got all these mental health issues. I got all these emotional issues. I've got all these things that I'm struggling through. And now we're like, well, man, I can't, like, if I did that and have a conversation with myself, Joel, I can't trust you. Just like, let's stop dealing with this, because you're blasting it to everybody and you're just spilling all your energy outward. It's bringing, again, that back home a little bit. Now, again, it's not to ask for help, but really is a crowd on YouTube or Twitter going to actually be your therapist or help you with anything or achieve confidence? Or is that an attention-getting cultural norm that we've established as our society that we keep doing, which is just eroding our sense of self? It's eroding our self-validation. It's eroding our self-confidence ultimately.
Yeah.
And that's really sad, because I think we've got to bring that, the confiding into ourselves. Don't just confide into things indiscriminately. So discrimination is important here, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. People don't like the word discrimination. I would use discretion.
Discretion.
Yeah.
Discrimination.
Yeah. I mean, it is discrimination. It's discriminating against information that should or should not be shared.
Yeah, I didn't mean it in like a against people way. I meant it in like the
right.
use of the word, like being discriminate.
Yeah, exactly.
To what I take in or not.
Exactly.
But I can appreciate why you would say that.
Just so that anybody who's like only heard it in one context understands that, no, you can use it in other contexts. Yeah, I think people have done that for two reasons. I think that everybody is seeking authenticity to counterbalance what we talked about before, which is this, I call it like sort of the Instagram world or the Instagram way of living, which is look at how pristine and perfect my life is in every possible way. And I think people are looking for expressions of authenticity, which will include all the baggage and all the nasty stuff too. And so there's a part of sharing one's challenges and problems in order to be transparent that my life isn't, it's relatable. It's got the challenges in there too. And I think the second reason why people do that is because they're looking for other people who also experience those same challenges. So they're looking for people to feel a sense of resonance. Am I the only one experiencing this? And I think the reason why it became not just like an experience people have, but a phenomena and got put into the zeitgeist is people liked it being modeled. And it's actually, once you get going, it's a very easy thing to do.
Well, it's a well of content. I mean, how many insecurities do we have versus like things we feel good about? We have like 10x the number.
Yep. Yeah. And so I would agree with you. I understand its roots and why people do it and where it started. And it's been well modeled. So the next level of this is to be transparent with one's challenges and then also provide one's solution for it. So if a person is, particularly if they're in any position of influence, now if they're just, they're just trash tweeting or whatever, just making trash posts wherever, whatever is the social media thing, that's fine. And most people don't stick around for that. Most people don't just want everybody's problems dumped on them. If a person is in a position of influence though, and sharing something, I do think it's nice to share to be transparent with one's challenges, especially if the other people look up to them. And I think it's not always fair to just leave everybody hanging. Like here are all the terrible things going on in my life. Done. It's like, okay, well, are you doing something to move through them? Or like, is there a solution here? Or, and so I do think it, like you said, the word discretion needs to be shown. There is a place, there is a time, there is an understandable need and desire. And also when it becomes a phenomena or a generalized way of interacting, you can see why it feels good initially, but like you said, it's eroding people's self-confidence over time.
Yeah, and I think that's what, basically I'm just saying, if you are a person watching or listening that struggles with self-confidence, just check how much you're spilling everything out to the outer world. I'm not necessarily saying we shouldn't do that. All I said was it's a cultural norm, kind of an expectation. I've noticed, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I've noticed anecdotally. And I think it's an access point for self-confidence. It's a lever you can look at in your life, and you can determine for yourself how much it's eroding your sense of self, how much it's eroding your self-confidence.
Yeah, good litmus test. If you're a person who's filled with self-confidence, you're probably not doing this in a bad way. And if you're a person really lacking self-confidence, maybe it's one of the things you'll want to check in with. I think that's great. And I also want to, as we wrap this up, because I'm feeling complete. I think we talked about self-confidence. Okay. I just want to make a marker of it. Last episode, we talked about markers of self-trust. And I think there is one very definitive marker of self-confidence, and it goes back to the original formula. And that is, it's the ability to learn from your experiences, both good and bad, both the successes and the failures. Can you learn from your experiences? And if you can learn from your experiences, it means that you had the experience in the first place, and you went out and overcame obstacles and did all the things you were supposed to do by being brave and showing courage and meeting the world where it was at and getting to the other side of whatever it threw at you. And then you were able to learn from it because you took an accounting. You considered what the experience actually was and its meaning and its implication, and you mined the patterns out of it. You mined the gold. And you were able to understand that it's not just because it was like something that maybe was a big deal for you in the moment, that doesn't mean that it has lifelong weight. It just means that in the moment it was a big deal. And then maybe ask why. Why was it a big deal in that one situation? So getting good at having the experiences and then getting good at taking an accounting on the other side lives heightened and far more fleshed out self-confidence.
So how good are you, as you're listening or watching, at taking action, getting that reference experience, setting up challenge for yourself, overcoming it? And how good are you at capturing those moments for review and finding the meaning or the tracking of it, tracking it over time? Which one do you lean more toward? Are you more of an action taker, but you're not tracking things and looking at the meaning? Or are you more about tracking and meaning and maybe action or external things are a little bit more challenging for you? We want to hear from you. You haven't been able to talk on this episode. There's not a third microphone, but basically you can come over and make a comment, ask a question, share your story about what's coming up. What are your experiences around self-confidence? Have you found yourself building self-confidence over time? Has it been eroded by certain actions, by certain things that happen in your life? And again, I think we're really looking at trying to flesh out a a sense of where you're starting. Almost imagine a map of your life, and we're focusing on the you are here dot. What is your experience? What owner's manual are you going to carry through your life? How are you going to approach the things that you're going to go do in life based on how you show up? And that includes your cognitive wiring, your personality type, but also these aspects of self that are a little adjacent to that. We want to capture those as well and weave them into your learning about who you truly are. So come over and make your voice heard.
Mm-hmm. I've really enjoyed doing this series. I don't know if other people enjoyed it, but I loved being
Absolutely they have.
To deep dive.
I have confidence in this, that everybody has loved it. It's been fantastic.
Yes, it's very popular. It's sweeping the nation. But I've loved being able to do a deeper dive into all of this, and my hope is that it really did give people an access point into greater self-awareness. At the end of the day, there is so much content that lives inside of us that is fascinating. And we're going to be the most interested in ourselves because that's how it works, right? That's how the ego works. And there is so much to love and appreciate about ourselves that we overlook. We get a lot of messaging from the outside world that we have to be just so in order to earn a positive feeling about ourselves. And my hope is that through the series, people were able to get inside, inquire inside of themselves in a way that shut out some of that noise, some of those shoulds from the outside world, some of the feedback, some of the outer world's expectations, and go, what do I think of me? What do I think of me? And not colored or biased or, just constant, reviewing all this negativity or the things that we should be feeling about ourselves, but going like, well, if I don't think well of myself, can I reevaluate what it means to think well of yourself? Like, can I reevaluate my metrics? Can I reevaluate my worth and value? Can I reevaluate my sense of confidence and self-trust? Like, am I really actually doing that bad? And I really hope people have gotten to a place where they have, you as the listener have been able to see this through a lens where going inside is a pleasure. Doing that self-inquiry is a pleasure for you. There's always work to be done, but there's so much beauty inside. There's so much to explore. It's such a rewarding experience. And when we bring some of the content that we've been avoiding because we're afraid of how it will impact us or make us feel, when we can bring it out from the shadows into the light and observe it and go, actually, it's not that bad, is it? It's actually, it's okay. And then we bring more out and we go, ooh, maybe that one's not okay. Maybe I should do something about that. But look at all this other great content, all this other stuff about me that's great. We're doing what Carl Jung called individuation. We're no longer a house divided between our conscious and everything else we're avoiding. We're now bringing all of it into the light, and now we can see the full spectrum of who we are in that moment, right? There's always content we can't access, but in that moment, we're getting as big a perspective as we can. And that's beautiful, right? It's beautiful to be able to sit with oneself in that place. So I really appreciate you, the listener, going through this journey with us, and I hope you were able to tap into a little bit of that beauty. So if you enjoyed this podcast, now I move on to my script. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, it helps us out a lot, and I read every one, and I always appreciate when people drop by and leave a good review. I truly do.
She really does read every one.
I do. So please go do that right now if you have not yet done so. We also have a video podcast that is on YouTube. In fact, you might have been watching us right now do our video podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can like and subscribe, and you can hit a little bell icon that lets you know when a new episode comes out. And you can also ask a question or leave a comment under this video. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave a rating and review for us on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality type. So if you want to take this inquiry of self to the next level and really optimize your personal growth, head over to personalityhacker.com. Look at that catalog of programs and see which one is right for you.
I mentioned earlier about building that owner's manual for your life. We have a program that literally helps you do that based on how you're wired, your personality type, one of 16 Myers-Briggs types. It helps you identify how you're learning information, making decisions, and we talk about all sorts of growth strategies unique to you and your type. So I recommend checking that out as maybe a starting point in your personal growth journey. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.